Hello and welcome to the release notes review for version 7.11. So we've got some really good releases here. So mainly to do with the admin. So let's dive in and take a look at the first one here is quick access to custom module settings. So now for any module, blogs, galleries, products, or custom modules, things like that, when we hover over the module name, we can see a context menu icon now. So clicking on that gives us direct access into settings, property management, and all the other areas of the module you might want to update. So you can jump straight into layouts, for example, or jump straight into the property management much quicker than before, where you had to load the list view first and then go to the configure menu and then jump into it. So that's going to speed up navigation through the menu. And it does depend on what extensions you have available. So if you have advanced search, you can jump into those settings if you've got that extension enabled. And also for events, you'll have access to the follow-up emails or any module where you have bookings enabled. Okay, let's just jump to the third item here. So this update changes some settings around the list view for modules, which we're looking at right now. A unified table view with saved views. So this is really cool. This update, much more functional than before. You'll notice some things have been rearranged here. We've got the create new button over here on the right with the configure menu and context menu all over here on the right. Still got the search box, but now we have filter by with a variety of options and sort by with customizable options based on the column that you want to sort. But as you build the filtering or sorting criteria, it will actually add them to the filter settings here. So we can see by default, sort by name ascending is sort of the default view. You could remove that and just let it fall back to nothing. But as we apply a view, so just making sure we apply that, and we can build upon these. So I might sort by name and descending and apply. So we can see we have two view settings applied. And what we can actually do is save that view. So if this is a common view that you often go to, often configure, that you need to view this particular module's items in, you can save that, give it a name, and then that'll be there for you to just switch to at any time. And I haven't gone as far as seeing if these are available for the end users, your clients, which I assume they are. So you can save views, I would assume, for them to view as well. So you may have several ways that you want to see the data depending on what you're doing. So having those save views is really handy. And then you can manage those save views as well, renaming them or deleting them. And also for modules that have both tree view and list view enabled, where we used to have icons up here to switch between those views. So they'll only appear now if they're active. So for example, products, we can see we've got list view and tree view available there. So they work as before. Okay, so let's jump back to that second item here. So improvements to the property management grid layout. So they've continued to work on the improvements here for laying out the edit screen for module items. So for example, how all the properties are laid out here. So in the previous release, we had the introduction of the property management where we could create groups and change the column widths that the properties were positioned in. So this just goes further into control of that. So we have a lot more fine-grained control now. So firstly, we have granular property widths. So where previously we just had like 3 sort of sizes we could pick from, now it's opened up to the full 12 column grid. So we can really fine-tune how wide and how those properties stack together. So for example, if I want the parent and template to be next to each other, I can do 6 column and 6 column. So they'll just stack next to each other, of course. But there is an additional introduction of like a clearing of the row. So sometimes you might want a property to be restrained to a certain column width, but you only want that to be on the row by itself. So you don't want other elements stacking next to it. So you can actually tell this to be on its own row. So it'll still maintain a 6 column width, but it will be on its own row. It'll clear the rest of the row and anything else will stack below that, even if it could fit next to it. So that's an additional option we have now. I'm just going to set that back. It says responsive collapse. So that's just saying, obviously, once the admin screen gets to a certain threshold, everything's going to stack, which is to be expected. It's the same functionality we had before. It's just now we have more columns that applies to. And widescreen support. So previously, I'm just going to save that. If we take a quick look at the edit screen, everything was sort of fixed to this width here. So this is basically using a 10 column width, but now we're going to have available the full 12 column. So we can go right to the edge now. So still by default, the main section is restricted to that column, 10 column, but jumping back to the property management, I can now change this item settings, this group, or this section to use the full 12 column. Okay, so we'll save that. And now when we view, we're getting that full width here. So that just allows a lot more width, particularly for the WYSIWYG or content editing windows. Okay, jumping down to configurable section width. So this is a really helpful feature. Now we have control of the width of the section itself as well. So not only can we lay out properties in columns, but we can actually set sections in columns as well. So like I did just then to change it to a full 12 width, we can actually go smaller and stack sections next to each other. So now that's starting to give us really good control of overall grid and then a subgrid for the properties. Okay, and of course, all this now starts to get harder to visualize and manage when you're controlling the sizes in this view and then having to go back to the list view to see how that actually applies. So we now have a live preview of the changes you're making here. So for example, if I make a change here, I'll just set that to 6, we can see the preview button down here has a little blue dot indicating that there's some changes that need saving or can be previewed. So clicking that opens up the sidebar here to show us just like a dummy preview of how that's going to look. So we can see our parent and template stacked next to each other. So that's what I said earlier. And we've got our full 12 column grid for the whole section. So that just gives us a quick preview without us having to leave this section or even save it before we review those changes. So just as a quick demo, I'm going to create a new section for content. This one, I want to put the content description box in there. So I want that to be full width. Going to drag that down into there. And then I want 2 other smaller ones side by side. So just say this is section 1. I'm going to make that 6. I'm going to make another section, and I'm going to make that 6 as well so that they stack next to each other. And let me just put a few items in here. Let's say for all these carousel images, I want them sort of to be in a column. So I'm going to put 3 in here and 4 in the other one. Not that you'd want to do this, but just to demonstrate the flexibility that we have. And I'm going to put content at the bottom. So move down. So I haven't saved this yet, but I can still preview it. Again, we've got all our main properties up here in a 12 column, and then we've got 2 sections side by side just to sort of condense those images closer. Of course, you could do that with just putting them in 6 column grids within their own section, but maybe you have different properties here in one section and a different group of properties in this section. And then we have our content section on its own, full width, so we've got more room to work with. So a lot more play here in how we lay out those edit screens. Okay, and then just further on it's saying updated property context menu. So that's just saying that these context menus here have some extra features, of course, that I've been going through. Mainly some of the new features here is the own row or shared row, which I mentioned before, so you can push subsequent properties out of the way and have them on their own row. You can also move to all properties. So this is just a reword of the disabled option. So previously it said disabled, but that was a bit misleading because it sort of means that you're wanting to disable the property, but really it's just changing its view status. So we're just moving it back to the all properties list here. So disabling it from the edit view, but not removing the property altogether. So there's just a rename to that. And then we have just a clearer selected versus hover state. So when we hover, we obviously sort of changes to that gray tinting there, but you can select these to move multiple items around. So holding the control or command key, you can select multiple ones. Previously, this just had the same gray selection indicator as the hover. So they've just made it into a blue highlight now to just distinguish those 2 different states. Okay, and finally, the enabled for visible properties is on by default. So when you create a new property, this tick box is on by default. So we'll throw that into the first section that you have available. Because in most use cases, you're going to want the property that you're creating to be available for editing. So this is just done by default now, rather than having to manually tick that or move it into the appropriate section later after creating it. So it just streamlines the property creation process a little bit more. Okay, and we can save that, and that will apply now to all the edit screens. So you can see our sections in the grid laying out nicely. Okay, so we've been through item 3. Jumping now, item 4, we have weighting management through drag and drop. So this has been a long time request in the public backlog. So basically what the feature is to be able to drag these items in the list view to resort them and have that sorting applied on the front end as well. So the way this is working is basically introducing the sorting as a custom property in much the same way as the weighting property is used, but you have to enable it first. So again, we can jump into property management, and we can see here there's a new system property called enable drag and drop order. So by moving it into a visible editing state, that will now be in play for that module listing. So we'll save that. And what happens now is we can now turn that on as like a sorting property. So we can sort by, and then here there's a tick box for manual order. So that's going to allow us to manually order the listings. So I'll apply that. And now we have, instead of tick boxes next to these, we have the little dragging handles. So I can just move these around to the order I want. And we can see after I've done that, it's detected the change and given us this reweigh button. So basically it's going to allow you to do all your sorting. And then once you're happy with the order, you then basically calculate the weighting. And that's going to go through. It's going to give you a warning that that's what it's going to do, and basically set all the sequential numbers for that drag and drop order field. So just like you might do manually with weighting, this is just sort of automatically doing it into a different property. So then, of course, you can use that property to do all your sorting on the component tag, similar to what you were able to do with the weighting property as well. Just that this won't apply by default like the weighting does. You have to actually set it as a sorting type, which is good because it means you can use this manual sorting in some views on the website, and you can choose not to use it in other areas where you might want a different sorting method. Okay, and when we turn that off, it goes back to just normal list view. Now, you can change that manually as well. So if you go into the item, you'll see, just because I put that at the top here, you can rearrange this, of course, however you want, but enable drag and drop order is just a number field, much like the weighting field. The one difference is that drag and drop ordering goes from 1 upwards. So it's a sequential numbering increasing, whereas, and 1 would be the first item, whereas weighting is reverse. It's the higher the number, the higher it is to the top. So they're kind of reversed. Okay, so yeah, we went through the manual ordering in the list, the reweigh button, and it's just saying the sorting logic here. So basically, if you're sorting by the drag and drop order, it's going to use that primarily, but if there are any items that maybe didn't have a drag and drop order specified, they would just fall back to the default, which is sorting by name, or if that's not available, release date or create date. Okay, and then just talks about the different ways that you can edit the drag and drop order. Like I showed, you can actually do the physical drag and dropping. You can manually change that in the item itself. And of course, you can do it via import and export as well, because again, it's just a property like anything else. So basically anywhere you can edit that property, you can control that ordering, and that includes front-end updating forms. Okay, and because it's just basically another property, it's available in Liquid as well with the Liquid handle D&D order. So you can use that in your Liquid logic as well. Now, the on-site editor has also been set up to support this drag and drop ordering, but to enable the on-site editor to use that functionality, you do have to put an additional data attribute into the layout. So I assume each item wrapper would need to have the data CMS OSE D&D attribute added to it, just so it can recognize that that's wanting to be used. Okay, and then it just goes through some additional information here on using this. If you duplicate an item that has drag and drop order, it just duplicates as a 0, so you'd have to set that order again, so it doesn't take on the order of the item you're duplicating. If you disable the drag and drop feature, so if you take the property back out of the visual editor sections, you won't lose all those values. The ordering will still be there behind the scenes, but you just won't be able to continue ordering the items in the admin. So it does that so that if you do re-enable it later, you've still got all those values in place. Okay, so obviously this is going to come in really handy for some particular types of modules, and that's why it's been done this way. It's like a property that you can enable, because not all modules are going to be suited for manual drag and drop, particularly modules where you have a lot of items. That's just not practical to do that. So yeah, this allows you to only activate it on modules that are going to benefit and need that sort of manual ordering system. Okay, next item, advanced multi-level sorting in Liquid Components. So now we have an additional way to sort items. So previously in a module component, when we're listing that out, I'll just make one up real quick here. Let's just use portfolio again. So when we want to sort, choose the sorting option. Previously it was just sort by. So we would choose the property that we wanted to sort by. Let's just say we're going to sort by ID, and then we just choose the sort order. You can ascending or descending. So that was the standard sort order, which works well combined with the filter by and filter value. But now we have a more advanced way of sorting. So there's a new parameter that we can add to our component tags called order by. So instead of sort by, it's now order by. So if you change the sort type to advanced, it changes it to order by instead of sort by. And this is just an open text field because it supports a JSON object, so JSON array. And this allows us to sort by multiple properties at once. So this is good if you have large data sets that you need to do multiple ordering. So let's say you have last name and first name, and you want to alphabetically sort by both last name and first name, because obviously a lot of people may have the same surname or last name. So within a group of Smiths where there's going to be a lot of records, you then want to fall down to alphabetical listing by first name. So by sorting by both last name and first name, it allows that additional layer of alphabetical sorting. That's just one use case. You could do that for whatever properties make sense to you for multi-level sorting, and you can sort by, I guess, any number of properties. But obviously at a certain point it becomes a bit too much depending on your data set, of course. And so the way we do this is just with a JSON query string, I guess. So you would paste that in there, and basically what you're doing is you're assigning each property in the order that you want it to sort by. So here we're saying the drag and drop order is ascending. We want to prioritize that. That's our main sorting. And then secondary, we're going to sort by name. So if there were a bunch of items that had the same drag and drop order number, then those would be then sorted by name in ascending order. And so this has been introduced to work together with the advanced filtering. So that's where we then have the where parameter. And again, that uses a JSON query string for determining how we're filtering the object. So if you're doing very basic filtering and sorting, you would use the filter by and the sort by parameters. If you want more advanced, you can use the where parameter and the order by parameter, and they use JSON query strings. So now we've got a lot of flexibility and a lot of control over the output through component tags. Okay, so basically it's saying that the supported fields that we can put into this new ordering system is much the same as what we had for the filter by. So it's any top level property or custom property that we're allowed to sort by previously. So still the same properties that we have access to, just that now we can do multiple ones. Okay, liquid variables are supported within the JSON query string as well. So just like with the where parameter, you can use liquid within that. I've tried doing it here in this particular interface. It does come up with an error if you try and use liquid in here, but doing it like on page, if you manually add that into your component, it will support liquid. So you could replace, a property name with a liquid variable. So you could start to dynamically control how something's sorted. Okay, and this here, deterministic order, is just saying that the ID will be used, like behind the scenes ID is added at the end of the order query string, just so that there's always something that it's going to fall back to for default ordering, which kind of was the case anyway, where it would always default to the name. In this case, if this is being used, it's going to default to the ID by the look of it. Okay, and it's just saying that it's not case sensitive, so it doesn't matter whether it's capitals or whatever, it's basically just going to lowercase everything and sort based on the characters. And null and empty values will just be sorted as they were before as well. So I assume they're just sorted at the end. So if you're sorting by a property that has an empty value or a null value, that's just going to be at the end of the sorting list, or depending whether it's ascending or descending. Okay, now the compatibility. So if you're using this in conjunction with the sort by and waiting, sort by obviously continues to work, but if you've got sort by in your component tag as well as order by, then I believe it's the order by is going to take precedence over that, and the sort by will be ignored. And for waiting, so obviously if you have waiting applied for items, usually that took priority over any sorting. Okay, and that will still be the case. So basically what it does is similar to the fallback for the ID sorting. Behind the scenes, it's going to add waiting as the first property that it sorts by. So if waiting is enabled on your module or in any items, that's still always going to be take priority unless you set waiting to be ignored, or if you add waiting manually to your JSON query. So let's say you add it at the end because you want that to be a fallback, then that will take priority. So waiting will always take priority unless you've overridden it somehow. Okay, and then it's just going through that. This is now in the component manager, which we're looking at here. So we've now got that simple and advanced sorting that we can switch from to gain access to that parameter. Okay, and there is validation and error handling built in. So if you do some syntax errors in here or invalid JSON, it's going to tell you that. So if I try and put something in, it's going to give us a warning. And if there is something misconfigured on the front end, it will throw an error instead of outputting the items as well. Much like if you have a liquid render out that error on the page. Okay, and then it just makes a note of the API, the Open API. So this order by logic using the JSON query syntax, that's already in place in the APIs. That's how the APIs work. And they also use the where filtering as well. So this just brings the component tag in line with how the APIs work as well. Okay, next item is the clearer search indexing actions. So these were always a little bit ambiguous with how they worked, mainly because of how they were worded. So when you're looking at the settings of a module, under item settings, you have where you can set up what the default is for if it's added to the site search index or available for search engines to index. So now basically the options are the same, but they've just been reworded. So you can index new items in the site search. That's for all new items that are created, or don't index new items. So just the wording now just is more clear to what those functions are actually doing. Same for search engines, index new items or don't index new items. And there's just going to be clearer confirmation on what's happening before that runs as well. And they're also introducing the background process indicator. So when you are applying this, particularly to a large data set, there'll be the blue dot blinking away up here, telling you that there's a background task running. And not only for setting the defaults for how the module behaves, but if you want to apply indexing settings under the SEO setup icon here, these are being renamed as well. So you can go and do like a bulk action to index all existing items, or remove all existing items from the index. So that's just been renamed as well. Okay, next item is the Toolbox standardization. So the Toolbox is the little slide out that we have on the right here. So there's various things that open the Toolbox. We've got the component manager is one, the file manager, and we can see there was all different sizes that these would open up at. So they've just consolidated the sizing to 3 different sizes. So you've got the small, which is what the component manager works on, medium for the file manager, and then like we saw previously with the property management preview, that used a very large one that almost took up the full screen. So depending on the content, that's just been cleaned up to have standardized sizes. Okay, and then we have support for international or Unicode characters in the URL paths. So when we're setting URLs, this previously only allowed English or Latin characters. Now it's going to support the full range, so Cyrillic, Chinese, Arabic, etc. So much more universal support there for different regions. And it just makes a note to say that both the encoded and decoded versions of those will be stored. So in the back end, the system will always use the encoded version. So everything will sort of fall back to that full encoded string, but it will display the sort of human readable version as well. So both versions will still work and still go to the same resources. And this applies for F2P uploads as well. They're not going to be, things that you upload will not be renamed like they were previously if you had any non-Latin characters in them. Now they're going to preserve those characters and work correctly. Okay, just a general one throughout the admin. Tooltips and links have all been standardized now. So just, again, cleaning up the admin, make things more uniform. So it's just a little cosmetic UI thing. And next we have a new payment gateway. So the Braintree payment gateway. So Braintree is a PayPal offering for payment gateways. So set up in much the same way, you'd go through your Braintree or PayPal account to get the API keys and load them into the payment settings just like before. So now we have Braintree. Okay, so another payment gateway that can be used. Okay, next we have some new API endpoints with the introduction of the property management. So what we were looking at before, with our property management, because we now have this new ability to configure sections and column widths for that presentational side of things, there's now endpoints to support that as well. So when you're programmatically creating modules, you can also set the display settings as well. Now, I haven't looked, I don't know if you can go down as far as like setting the columns and that, but certainly you can create sections and add the properties to those sections and turn the visibility on for editing. So all that can be controlled. So this is also good for the Agent One AI, because previously when it was creating modules and properties for you, you had to manually add them to the visual editing mode because it couldn't previously do that because there was no APIs. So now it can do that. And additionally, there's new APIs for tags. So you can now use the APIs to create tags for a particular module. So that's just opening up again more functionality via the APIs and for Agent One. Okay, and lastly, we have trial site, lifecycle, and expiration. So just some further controls around trial sites. So now all new trial sites will have a lifespan of 6 months. After that, they'll start a deletion process. It says here that, which means they'll be backed up for 180 days before they're fully removed. So you can recover them after they've been gone into that deletion phase, but there will be notifications sent via email as well before that happens. So different rules apply for how sites become trial sites. So if they're migrated from version 6 or if they're downgraded from a live site, different sort of ruling applies. So have a read through that just so you understand, and just check with the types of trial sites you have, how that's going to affect you. But it's a good opportunity to just look at the trial sites, clean up any ones that you don't need, delete them out of there, just to make this easier to audit and see what's going to affect you and what you need to pay attention to or not. But it doesn't look like there's any drastic measures here being taken to delete trial sites. There's plenty of time and there'll be notifications, but just have a bit of a look at your current trial sites and clean those up so this becomes a bit of an easier process. Okay, and then we have the bug fixes, which you can look through to see if any of those affect your projects. One I will just bring your attention to is in the WYSIWYG editor, there was an issue where the keyboard shortcut for saving, so Control S, didn't work in the WYSIWYG editor mode, so that's been fixed. So that's probably one a lot of people use a lot, so just now know that that will work. Okay, thank you very much.